So here I want to talk a little bit about the history of PTSD. It has a long and varied history. It has been known by many different names, and it has of course been around for a very long time. It's been around for as long as there have been traumatizing situations that human beings have been presented with. It was talked about by Shakespeare in some of his writings. It was talked about in the Civil War. In World War I, we referred to it as shell shock and soldier's heart, and psychiatrists and doctors began to recognize that something wasn't quite right with some people who returned from the battle zones in World War I, and they typically had lots of nightmares. They would be often mute during the daytime, where they wouldn't feel able to talk to anybody or describe their symptoms. They would have shakes, they'd be very anxious, they would lose their appetite. And doctors began to realize that something isn't right with some of these men that returned from the battlefront in World War I. So they began to call it shell shock. So people are shocked by the shelling and the bombing that took place in World War I. It was also called a soldier's heart for some reason. In World War II, it began to be known as operational fatigue or combat neurosis, and psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud wrote quite a bit about that also. That'd be an interesting piece of work for you to do, is to have a look at how Sigmund Freud spoke about PTSD or combat neurosis, as he often referred to it. It first appeared in the DSM-3. That's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 3rd edition. That's the manual that psychiatrists refer to when they're making diagnoses. So they look at the manual, they check out the symptoms that the person is experiencing, and then they come to a preliminary diagnosis. Okay. They also look at how long the person has been experiencing these symptoms, and then they make the diagnosis. So it first appeared in the DSM-3, which was back in 1980. So it's been fully recognised by psychiatrists in the West since 1980. We recognised the science of it in the mid-70s, and it began to develop into this term that we have for it, post-traumatic stress disorder. So what do we mean by post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD as it's often referred to? Well, basically it's where somebody has experienced a great deal of stress, okay, and that has developed into a disorder, a stress disorder. When we say disorder in psychiatry or psychology, what we mean is that the mental health issue that the individual is suffering from or experiencing is causing a great deal of disorder in their life. Okay, so it's causing disorder in their ability to work, to have friendships, relationships, to be able to sleep at night time. It causes disorder in their appetite also. Okay, and the post-traumatic basically, of course, means that this stress disorder happens post-trauma. So after a traumatic episode, we develop this stress disorder, okay? Post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? Thank you very much. Speak to you shortly.